The moving truck was in my driveway when my sister brought me home from the hospital. I had been gone 11 days. 11 days in a hospital bed in Atlanta, Georgia, recovering from emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix that had been caught late enough to be genuinely dangerous and early enough to be survivable, and that had left me thinner and slower and considerably more aware of my own mortality than I had been on the Tuesday morning when I drove myself to the urgent care clinic thinking I had a stomach bug. My sister Vanessa had handled everything while I was in the hospital. She had driven down from Chattanooga the day of my surgery and had managed my house and my dog and my work notifications and the particular cascade of logistics that accumulates around an adult life when the adult at the center of it is suddenly unavailable. I owed her more than I could calculate. She turned onto my street and slowed the car, and I saw the truck before she said anything. It was a large moving truck, the professional kind with a company name on the side. Backed up the driveway of my house in the Decatur neighborhood of Atlanta with its rear doors open and two men carrying furniture through my front door. My front door. I sat very still in the passenger seat. Vanessa put the car in park at the curb. She turned to me with an expression that told me she had not known about this either. I looked at my house, at the moving truck, at two men I had never seen carrying a large wooden armoire through the door. I had painted myself 3 years earlier the particular shade of blue that had taken me 4 sample pots and 2 weeks of deliberation to select. I looked at my mother-in-law Patricia's car parked on the street. Then I looked at my husband David's car in the driveway beside the truck. I took a breath. I asked Vanessa to hand me my bag from the back seat. I found my phone. I found the folder app I kept for important documents. I opened the file I had saved there 4 months earlier on a Tuesday afternoon after a conversation with my attorney that had felt like excessive caution at the time. I read through it once. Then I got out of the car. My name is Simone Carter, and I am 30 years old, and I have been married to David Carter for 3 years, and I love my husband with the specific, complicated love of someone who has spent 3 years navigating the particular challenge of being married to a good man who has a very strong mother. David is 33. He is genuinely kind and genuinely talented at his work as a landscape architect and genuinely devoted to me in the way people are devoted when devotion is their natural state rather than an effort they have to maintain. He is also someone for whom his mother Patricia's unhappiness registers as an emergency, requiring immediate response regardless of the reasonableness of her unhappiness or the cost of responding to it. This is not a character flaw exactly. It is the specific shape of a wound that goes back further than I do. Patricia Carter is 64 years old and had raised David and his younger brother Marcus alone after their father left when David was 9. She had done it with genuine sacrifice and genuine competence, and had built her identity significantly around that sacrifice and competence and around the loyalty she believed it should produce in her sons. She was not wrong that she had sacrificed. She was also not wrong that David felt the weight of that sacrifice. Where things became complicated was in her expectation that David's loyalty to her should be primary over his loyalty to his marriage. Not explicit. She would never have said it explicitly. But it showed in the patterns, the calls that came at inconvenient times and expected immediate response, the visits that expanded beyond agreed timelines, the opinions about our home and our finances, and our plans that were offered without invitation and received by David with the deferential attention of someone who had never fully separated his sense of obligation from his sense of love. I had spent 3 years navigating that dynamic with the particular patience of someone who had decided that the marriage was worth more than the conflict, and that most situations could be managed through clear communication and appropriate boundaries if those boundaries were held consistently. I had also spent those 3 years watching the financial situation in David's family change. Patricia had worked as an office manager for 20 years and had retired 2 years earlier on a pension that was adequate when it was established and less adequate, after the combination of inflation and a series of decisions that had produced debt she had not shared with David until the debt was significant. Marcus, David's brother, lived in Chicago, and had his own family and his own financial constraints, and had made clear in a series of conversations that I was not present for, but the outcomes of which I observed that he was not in a position to provide support to Patricia beyond a monthly contribution that was modest, which left David. David had told me in September that his mother was struggling. He had told me in October that she needed help. He had told me in November that he was thinking about what they could do. He had not told me that Patricia was planning to move in. He had not told me because he had not yet told himself. That was how things worked with David and his mother. The decisions arrived without being made. They accumulated through conversations and implications, and the particular gravity of Patricia's need pulling David's responses in a direction that felt inevitable rather than chosen. In December, David mentioned casually over dinner that his mother had been having some trouble with her apartment. In January, he mentioned that her lease was up for renewal, and the new rate was more than she could comfortably manage. In February, he mentioned that he had been thinking about whether she might stay with us temporarily. Temporarily. I had heard that word, and I had understood what it meant and what it did not mean, and I had gone to see my attorney the following Tuesday. My attorney was a woman named Gloria Hendricks, who had been recommended by my colleague Rena, and who practiced family and property law from an office in Midtown Atlanta that was full of plants and direct sunlight and the particular organized calm of someone who had been helping people think clearly about complicated situations for a long time. I told Gloria the full picture. The marriage. David. Patricia. The pattern of David's responses to his mother's needs. The conversation about temporary housing that had been introduced casually over pasta, and that I understood to be the beginning of something rather than a casual observation. Gloria listened without judgment. Then she asked me a series of questions about the house. The house on Adeline Street in Decatur had been purchased jointly. My name and David's name were on the deed. The down payment had been split. The mortgage was joint. We were equal owners by every legal measure. Gloria explained several things. She explained that a joint owner could not be prevented from inviting guests to a jointly owned property. She explained that the distinction between a guest and a resident had legal implications that depended on duration, contribution to household costs, and the establishment of residency. She explained that once residency was established for a third party in Georgia, certain rights attached to that residency that made removal more complicated than it otherwise would be. She was telling me something without saying it directly. She was telling me that if Patricia moved in and stayed long enough, and if nothing formal defined the nature of her presence, the situation could become significantly more complicated to address if I needed to address it. I asked her what I could do. She explained the options. The one we settled on was a document, a formal household agreement. Not hostile. Not adversarial. Simply clear. A document that defined the terms under which any extended guest could stay in the home, what those terms were, what the duration was, and what the process was for any changes to those terms. The document required both owners to agree before any extended guest arrangement was established. Both owners, David and I signed it. Gloria prepared it, and I signed my portion, and she filed it with her office and kept a copy and sent a copy to my personal email, which I forwarded to my personal cloud storage account and printed, and kept in the fireproof box under the bed where I kept my passport and my social security card and the deed to the house. Then I went home and made dinner and did not tell David about the conversation with Gloria because I was hoping I would never need to reference the document at all. That was in February. In March, I got appendicitis day. The 11 days in the hospital were the longest 11 days of my adult life, and also in some ways among the most clarifying. Serious illness does something to your understanding of what matters. Not in a dramatic, revelatory way. In the quiet, specific way of someone lying in a hospital bed at 2 a.m, listening to the building breathe and thinking with unusual clarity about the shape of her life. I thought about my marriage, about David, about the specific goodness of a man who had driven to the hospital at 3 a.m. without being asked and had sat in a waiting room chair for 6 hours and had held my hand when I came out of surgery, looking at me with the expression of someone who had been very frightened and was very relieved. I thought about Patricia. David had called her from the hospital. Of course he had. She was his mother, and he was frightened. And calling his mother was the natural response to being frightened regardless of age or marital status, and I did not begrudge him that call. What I did not know was what that call had produced. Vanessa told me later that Patricia had arrived at my house on day 3 of my hospitalization, with luggage, a specific amount of luggage that suggested more than a brief visit. Vanessa had found her in my kitchen on day 4, reorganizing my cabinets. Vanessa had not felt she had the authority to ask Patricia to leave since David had not asked her to leave. David had not asked her to leave because David had been dividing his time between the hospital and the house and managing the particular emotional weight of a wife in serious medical condition and had not fully processed what was happening at home, or had processed it and found the moment too difficult to address. That was also possible. By day 7 of my hospitalization, Vanessa told me quietly during an afternoon visit that Patricia had called Marcus in Chicago. By day 9, the moving truck had been arranged. Not for a visit, for a move. 11 days. That was how long it took for a temporary arrangement to become a permanent one in my absence. I found this out in the car on the way home from the hospital when Vanessa, who had been trying to find the right moment for 4 days, finally told me everything with the particular apologetic directness of someone delivering information they wish they did not have to deliver. I listened to all of it. Then I asked her to hand me my bag-o. David came out of the house when he heard the car. He looked at me with the complicated expression of a man who is genuinely glad to see his wife home from the hospital and also genuinely aware that the situation he is standing in is one he does not know how to explain. I hugged him. I meant it. He held me longer than he usually held me, which told me he had been frightened for 11 days and was still working through the relief of my being home. Then I stepped back and looked at the house. "Tell me what happened," I said. David told me. He told me the way people tell stories when they know the story does not reflect well on decisions they made or did not make, carefully, with more context than was perhaps necessary. With the particular self-justifying rhythm of someone who is explaining rather than simply accounting. Patricia had come to help. She had been worried. When the situation extended, she had mentioned that her lease situation in her apartment was becoming urgent. David had mentioned it to Marcus. Marcus had suggested this might be an opportunity for everyone. David had not said yes. He had also not said no. And in the space of that non-answer, Patricia had begun making arrangements. "She's moving in," I said. David rubbed the back of his neck. "It would be temporary. Temporary." I looked at the moving truck, at the armoire being carried through my front door. "David," I said, "that is a moving truck." He looked at it. "I know," he said quietly. "Moving trucks are not temporary infrastructure." He didn't answer. "Did you agree to this?" I asked. He looked at me with the expression I recognized, the one that was not quite yes and not quite no, and that occupied the space where a decision should have been made and wasn't. "Not explicitly," he said. "David, I said we could talk about it," he said. She took that as agreement. I looked at my husband for a long moment, not with anger exactly, with something more tired than anger. The specific tiredness of a woman who had spent 3 years watching this exact pattern operate and who had hoped that 11 days in a hospital might have clarified something for her husband about whose house this was and whose marriage this was and whose decision this should have been. "Come inside," I said. "Both of you." Patricia was in my living room supervising the placement of a bookshelf I had never seen before. She turned when I came in. Her expression was the carefully arranged warmth of someone who has made a unilateral decision and is presenting it as something else. "Simone," she said, "you look so much better. I'm so glad you're home." She came forward to hug me. I accepted the hug. Then I stepped back and said, "Patricia, can you ask the movers to stop for a moment?" She blinked. "What?" "Please ask them to stop. I need to have a conversation with you and David before anything else comes into this house." A beat of silence. Patricia looked at David. David looked at me. I waited. David spoke to the movers. They stopped. They stepped outside. We sat down in the living room. The three of us. Patricia on the sofa. David in the chair beside her. Me across from them both. I reached into my bag and removed my phone. I found the document. I did not open it yet. I want to understand what we are talking about, I said. Not what was assumed or implied or taken as agreement. What is actually being proposed? Patricia said, I'm going through a difficult time financially, and David offered to help. David mentioned that we might talk about it, I said. That's different from an offer. Patricia's expression shifted slightly. I need to know, I said, whether this is a visit or a move. Patricia said, I was hoping we could work out a more permanent arrangement. I looked at David. He looked at the floor. Permanent, I said. Or semi-permanent, Patricia said. While I get back on my feet, I nodded slowly. Then I opened the document on my phone. In February, I said, I met with my attorney. We prepared a household agreement that defines the terms under which any extended guest arrangement in this home can be established. I turned the phone so they could see the document. The agreement requires consent from both owners of the property before any extended guest arrangement is formalized. Patricia stared at the phone. David slowly lifted his eyes from the floor. Both owners, I said. Me and David. I signed it in February. David has not signed it because I have not asked him to sign it until now. The room was quiet. Simone, David said carefully. When did you do this? February, I said. After the first conversation about your mother's housing situation. He absorbed that. You went to an attorney, he said. Yes, without telling me. Yes, I said, because I needed to understand my own position before having a conversation that I knew was going to be difficult, and that I knew was going to be emotionally charged, and that I knew I needed to approach from a place of information rather than reaction. David was quiet for a long moment. Patricia was very still. This is my home too, I said to David. Not to Patricia. To David. I was in the hospital for 11 days. I came home to a moving truck in my driveway and furniture in my living room that was arranged without my knowledge and without my consent. I kept my voice steady. I need you to understand that. David looked at me. I know, he said quietly. Do you? I asked. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then he said, yes, I do. Patricia began. I think this is being made into something more complicated than it needs to be. I looked at her. Not unkindly. Simply directly. Patricia, I said. I understand you are in a difficult situation. I understand that David loves you and wants to help you. I want to help you too. But this house is mine equally with David, and decisions about who lives in it are mine equally with David, and that is not a complication. That is the accurate situation. Patricia looked at David. David did not look at her. That itself was something now. The movers were paid and released. Patricia's furniture remained in the truck overnight while David arranged for it to go to a storage facility the following morning. Patricia stayed that night, in the guest room. Not because the situation was resolved, but because she had nowhere else to go that evening, and because I was 30 years old and had just come home from the hospital and was not willing to make an elderly woman's immediate housing situation worse simply to make a point. That was not weakness. That was accuracy about what the situation required. David and I talked that night after Patricia went to sleep. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the document or the attorney or the legal specifics. About the pattern. About the 3 years of conversations I had absorbed without fully voicing my concerns. About the 11 days in the hospital during which the thing I had feared had happened faster than I had imagined it could happen. About what David had actually been thinking and feeling and what he had and had not been able to say. He talked about his mother the way he had never talked about her to me before. Not defensively. Honestly, about the weight of her sacrifices, about the specific way her needs registered in him as imperatives rather than requests, about the 9-year-old boy who had watched his father leave and had decided somewhere in that experience that he would never be the person who failed his mother. I listened. Then I said, "David, I need to be as important to you as she is." He looked at me. "Not more important," I said. "As important. I need to know that when you make decisions about our home and our life, they are made with me as your first partner. Not afterward. Not in the space left over from other obligations." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't handle this right." "No," I said. "You didn't. I should have talked to you before anything happened." "Yes." He looked at his hands. "I was scared," he said. "She was scared. And when she's scared, He stopped. "I know," I said. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," I agreed. "But it helps me understand it." We talked for another hour. By the time we turned off the lights, we had not solved everything. We had not erased the pattern or established overnight what it had taken 3 years to build. But something had shifted in the room between us, something that felt like the beginning of a more honest accounting than we had managed before. That was enough for one night, no. We found Patricia an apartment. Not immediately. It took 6 weeks and involved several difficult conversations and one session with a couples therapist named Dr. Renee Abrams, who had the particular gift of making difficult conversations feel possible by changing the shape of the room they happened in. David made calls. He researched senior housing options in Atlanta. He looked at assisted living facilities that were not quite what Patricia needed yet, but that gave us a picture of the landscape. He found 3 apartment options within 10 miles of our house that were within a budget we could help supplement through a monthly contribution that David and I agreed on together. With conversation and consent, and the particular process of 2 people making a decision as partners rather than one person discovering what had already been decided. Patricia resisted at first. Not dramatically. With the particular wounded dignity of someone who had expected a different outcome and was adjusting. She said she had thought the family would handle this differently. She said she had not expected to feel unwelcome. I said she was not unwelcome. I said the question of a permanent move into our home was a different question from whether she was welcome as a visitor, and that the first question required a process that had not been followed. She looked at David. David said, "Mom, Simone is right." 3 words from David that I had never heard in that combination directed at his mother in the context of a disagreement with me. It was not a dramatic moment. It was a very significant one. Patricia moved into an apartment in Decatur 6 weeks after the morning of the moving truck. It was a good apartment, good light, a small balcony, 10 minutes from our house. We had dinner with her every Sunday. Not because it was required, because it was right, and because Patricia in a home of her own was a different version of Patricia than Patricia trying to establish herself in someone else's home. The particular dignity of having your own space did something to her that sharing our space would have prevented. She was better company. She was more herself. David and I continued seeing Dr. Abrams for 4 months. The sessions were not comfortable. They were useful, which is the distinction that matters with couples therapy. We talked about the patterns that had existed before I recognized them. We talked about the things I had absorbed quietly that I should have said directly. We talked about David's relationship with obligation and what it cost him and what it had cost us. Dr. Abrams had a phrase she used when one of us was doing the thing where we were explaining our behavior rather than examining it. She would say, "I hear the reason. What about the impact?" That question changed the shape of more than one conversation. By the time we stopped seeing Dr. Abrams, we were not fixed. Fixed is not the right word for a marriage. A marriage is not broken and then fixed. It is ongoing. It is a continuous process of 2 people choosing each other and choosing honesty and choosing the conversation over the silence. We were better at choosing the conversation. That was the work. I am 30 years old, and I live in my house on Adeline Street in Decatur, Georgia, with the blue front door I painted myself, and the dog whose name is Theodore, and the husband I love in the specific, complicated way of someone who has been through something difficult with a person and come out on the other side still choosing them. The document is still in the fireproof box. I have not needed to reference it since the morning Patricia's furniture was in the living room. I do not expect to need it again, but it is there. Not as a weapon, not as a threat, as information. As the accurate record of what I understood 4 months before the situation required that understanding to be explicit. Gloria Hendricks calls it protective documentation. I call it what my mother called everything she kept in the drawer in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, just in case. My mother kept her just-in-case drawer full for 30 years and used it perhaps 4 times. She considered it a reasonable ratio. She said that most of the value of preparation was in the confidence it produced rather than in the times it was actually deployed. She was right about that. I went to see Gloria in February because something in me said this conversation is coming and you should understand your position before it arrives. That feeling was the right feeling. The document I signed was the right document. The conversation I had from a position of information, rather than panic on the morning I came home from the hospital, was better than the conversation I would have had without it. I did not win anything. I protected something. My home. My marriage. The particular space in which David and I were supposed to make decisions together. That space is intact. Patricia has her apartment. David has been seeing an individual therapist for 6 months, working on the things that need working on. And on Sunday evenings, we drive 10 minutes to have dinner with his mother, who is better in her own home than she ever would have been in ours, and who occasionally makes the jerk chicken that David has been eating since childhood, and that smells extraordinary, and that she will not share the recipe for, which is its own kind of power, and I respect it. T. Ordinary things. Good things. The kind that require work to maintain and are worth the work. If you are in a marriage or a partnership where you can feel a conversation coming before it arrives, I hope this story gives you permission to prepare for it before it gets there. Not to control the outcome. To be in the conversation as an informed person rather than a surprised one. Preparation is not distrust. It is self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation of every honest relationship I have ever seen function well over time. Go see your attorney. Start the document. Keep the copy in the fireproof box. You may never need it, but you will be a different person in the conversation because you have it. That difference matters. Thank you for being here today. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need the reminder.